Have you ever had one of those conversations with a stranger and things just went totally off the rails? You totally misread what they meant, or it's like talking to a wall, right? Turns out we're all kind of bad at talking to strangers. I was reading this book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers. It's all about why we misunderstand each other. And it got me thinking about all those times I've messed up talking to people I didn't know. Like just the other day, I was at the store and this woman was checking out the avocados, trying to find a ripe one. So I tried to be helpful, and I pointed to one that looked good, just trying to be nice. And she gives me this look like I just insulted her or something. It was so awkward. Maybe she just wanted to pick it out herself. Or maybe she had some secret avocado method. Who knows? But it made me think about how easy it is to misinterpret things. And that's what Gladwell talks about. All these interesting stories from Cortez meeting Montezuma to, more recent stuff like the Amanda Knox case really shows how our assumptions about people can have big consequences. One of the first things he talks about is the transparency illusion. It's this idea that we think we can tell how people are feeling just by looking at their faces. Like a smile equals happy, frown equals sad, right? But it's not that simple. Gladwell uses the Amanda Knox case. She was that American student accused of murder in Italy. Well, after the murder, her behavior wasn't what people expected. She didn't seem sad enough, and she was even seen smiling sometimes. So people thought she must be guilty. But Gladwell says that a lot of her behavior could be explained by cultural differences, and that we often misunderstand facial expressions. Like something normal in one culture could seem suspicious in another. And there's research on this. Gladwell talks about a study where people were shown pictures of people from the Trobriand Islands, and they were asked to guess their emotions based on their faces. Turns out people were terrible at it, really bad. It shows that even basic emotions can be expressed differently depending on the culture. So yeah, maybe reading people's faces isn't so reliable after all. So we have that transparency illusion thing. And then Gladwell adds this concept of defaulting to truth. This is where we basically just assume people are telling the truth, even if there's stuff that says they might not be. Our brains are set to trust as a default. And this can be a problem. Gladwell tells this story about Ana Montes, a U.S. intelligence officer who was spying for Cuba for years. And her colleagues missed all the signs because they just assumed she was honest. They defaulted to truth even when things weren't adding up. And how she got caught is crazy. It was just a small detail, like a phone call on a Saturday night, that finally made people suspicious enough to investigate. It's wild how we miss small clues, even when it's really important. So that Ana Montes story shows how our instinct to trust can be used against us. It makes you think, how many times have we been fooled because we were too trusting? How do we know when to trust our gut and when to be suspicious? It's a tough one. And Gladwell doesn't have easy answers, but he at least makes us aware of this blind spot we have, which is important for navigating all this. Now, you might think alcohol would make talking to strangers easier, like it makes you more relaxed and social, right? But Gladwell says that alcohol actually makes it harder to judge people's intentions, especially in certain situations. And he's not just talking about embarrassing drunk moments. He says that alcohol actually affects our brains and how we make decisions. He talks about this thing called alcohol myopia, which is really interesting. It's like when we drink, our brains kind of get tunnel vision. We only focus on what's happening right then, and we ignore the consequences later on. This can lead to risky behavior. And Gladwell says this is a big factor in a lot of sexual assault cases. He uses the Brock Turner case as an example. That Stanford swimmer convicted of assault. Alcohol was a big part of that whole situation for both Turner and the victim. It makes it hard to figure out what really happened in terms of consent and stuff. So what we think of as alcohol loosening us up is actually this complex brain thing. It can mess with our judgment and memory without us realizing it. Kind of scary when you think about it. Now get this. Gladwell goes into this idea called coupling. Basically, it's the idea that some behaviors are linked to specific situations. He uses this example of how suicide rates dropped way down in Britain when they stopped using this super toxic town gas and switched to natural gas. It's not that people suddenly got happier. It's that they didn't have this easy way to end their lives anymore. It's like if you're trying to eat healthy and you just stop buying junk food, you're changing your environment to make it easier. And he uses this kind of dark example about Sylvia Plath, the poet. She took her own life using a gas oven. Gladwell points out that was a common way back then because that town gas was everywhere. He even has this crazy story about how people would try to revive people who attempted suicide with, get this, more gas. Sounds crazy now, but back then it was what they knew. But the point is, once they got rid of that type of gas, suicide rates went down. People were still struggling, but they didn't have this easy, deadly option. It shows how our environment can affect us, even in those really dark moments. And this coupling thing, it's not just about suicide.
Gladwell uses it to explain all sorts of things, from crime to addiction to, well, pretty much anything you can think of. He talks about these experiments in Kansas City, where they tried different ways of policing. And they found out that, surprise, surprise, just having a bunch of cops in a neighborhood didn't really stop crime. But what did work was focusing on the very specific spots where crime happened most, like certain street corners or buildings. It was about addressing the environment where it was happening. It's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? You can have cops everywhere, but if the problems are still there, it won't make a difference. And this is a big point about how we misunderstand strangers, not just individually, but like as a system. We make judgments about whole neighborhoods, about whole groups of people, based on limited information. We see a few bad people and think everyone is bad. But, like Gladwell says, it's not that simple. Human behavior is complicated, and it's influenced by things we don't always see. And that can make us biased, especially towards strangers. In talking about misunderstandings that end badly, Gladwell brings up Sandra Bland. The young black woman pulled over for a traffic stop and ended up dead in jail a few days later. It was a huge story, and for good reason. Gladwell says that her encounter with the police was a perfect example of all the things we've been talking about, like misreading faces, defaulting to truth, coupling, and those biases in policing. All of that coming together in a terrible way. He goes back to that dash cam footage and breaks down how it all went wrong. The officer, Brian Encinia, was obviously nervous, suspicious from the start. He was looking for problems and, well, he found them. He saw Bland's frustration and anger as being defiant, and that made things worse. Gladwell says that this kind of being on high alert, always expecting the worst, is often how police are trained, especially in certain places or with certain people. It's like they're taught to see danger everywhere, which can lead to these misunderstandings. And Bland, well, she was upset, and rightfully so. Pulled over for something small, being treated badly. She was standing up for herself. But in that situation, it was seen as threatening, and it all spiraled out of control, ending in her death.
It's heartbreaking to watch, and it makes you think about the power dynamics in those situations,
How assumptions and biases can have these real, awful consequences. One of the things that stuck with me from the book was how easily we can be tricked, even by people who seem totally trustworthy. Gladwell talks about this guy, Harry Markopolos, who tried to expose Bernie Madoff way before that whole Ponzi scheme thing blew up. It's a crazy story, right? Markopolos was this forensic accountant, and he just had this feeling that something was off about Madoff's investment returns. Like they were just too good to be true, So he starts looking into it. And the more he looked, the more he thought Madoff was running a scam. The numbers just didn't make sense. Like it was impossible. And he tried to tell everyone, the SEC, journalists, everyone, like yelling, this guy's a fraud. But no one listened. I mean, I get it. Madoff was like this Wall Street big shot, super charming. And people wanted to believe him. They had their money with him their whole lives, so who wants to think it's all fake? But Markopolos wouldn't give up. He didn't just default to truth, He saw the warning signs, trusted his gut, and kept going, even when everyone said he was wrong. And, well, we know how it ended. Madoff's whole thing fell apart. Billions of dollars gone. So many lives messed up. And it could have been stopped if people had been a little less trusting, a little more willing to question things. It makes you think, right? How many times do we ignore those little doubts, those feelings that something's not right? Maybe it's a business deal, a friend acting strange, or even a news story that seems too good to be true. We ignore it because it's easier to believe what we want to believe, even if, deep down, we're not so sure. So, after all that about deception, Gladwell goes back to coupling, that idea we talked about before. Remember the suicide rates in Britain dropping when they changed the gas they used? Gladwell uses that to show how our environment, like where we make decisions, affects our behavior, even in life or death situations. It's not that people stopped wanting to end their lives, it's that they didn't have that easy way to do it anymore. It's like if you're quitting smoking, you get rid of all the cigarettes, right? You make it easier on yourself. And this coupling idea is not just suicide. Gladwell uses it for crime, accidents, pretty much anything. He talks about these experiments they did in Kansas City, testing different ways to do policing. And guess what? Just having tons of cops in a high-crime area didn't really lower the crime rate. But what did work was focusing on very specific spots where crime happened the most, like street corners, certain buildings. It was about changing the environment where the crime was happening. Like, if you're trying to get rid of roaches, you don't just spray everywhere. You go right to where they are, get to the root of it. And it's the same with people. If you want to change how people act, you got to understand where it's happening. And that brings us back to how we misunderstand strangers, not just one-on-one, but as a whole system. We judge whole neighborhoods, whole groups of people, based on just a little bit of info. We see a few bad people and think everyone's bad. But Gladwell says it's just not that simple. People are complex. How they act depends on a lot of things we don't always see. And that can make us biased, especially with strangers. And this leads us to one of the most powerful and really sad stories in the book, Sandra Bland. That young black woman who got pulled over for a little traffic thing and ended up dead in jail. Gladwell says her interaction with the police is a perfect example of all this stuff we've been talking about. Misreading faces, that default to truth, coupling, and all the biases in the system, all of it coming together in a horrible way. He goes back and looks at that dash cam video, breaks down how it went so wrong. The officer, Brian Encinia, was clearly nervous, suspicious right from the start, looking for a reason to arrest her to find something wrong. He thought her being frustrated and angry meant she was defiant and aggressive, and that just made things worse. Gladwell points out that this kind of always being on alert, suspicious, is often how police are trained, especially in some areas, or with certain types of people. It's like they're always expecting danger, which can lead to these really bad misunderstandings. And Bland, well, she was upset, and rightfully so, pulled over for something minor, not treated well, and standing up for herself. But in that situation, it was seen as threatening, and it all went downhill from there, ending in her death. It's a truly sad story. It shows how bad things can get when people misunderstand each other, when there's bias, and when assumptions about strangers are made. So where do we go from here? Gladwell says we need to be more aware of ourselves when judging strangers. We need to realize we don't see everything, and our ideas about people can be wrong. We have to be more humble, question our assumptions, and be open to the fact that we might be wrong. It's hard, right? It goes against our instinct to protect ourselves, to be careful around people we don't know. But if we want to stop these awful misunderstandings from happening, we got to do the work, face our own biases, and try to fix the problems in the system that cause these conflicts. It's like that Maya Angelou quote, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I think that's what Gladwell wants us to do. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep trying to understand each other. Even when it's tough, even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it makes us rethink everything we thought we knew. Because really, being able to connect with strangers, understand them, see them as people just like us, that's what makes us human, right? And that's what gives me hope. So that's part of my deep dive into talking to strangers. It's really made me think, and I hope it's made you think too. It's funny, after reading Talking to Strangers, I started noticing all these little things in my own life, like where I was defaulting to truth, making assumptions, misreading signals. Like just the other day, I was at the park and there was this guy on a bench, kind of talking to himself. And I immediately thought, oh, this guy's a little creepy. But then I was like, wait a minute, maybe he's just practicing for a play or something, or working through something in his head. Or maybe he's just a little quirky, I caught myself judging this guy, based on nothing really. It made me think, how often do we do that? Judge people just from a quick glance, from these little things that don't really tell us anything about them. And that's the tricky part about talking to strangers, right? We have our own limited view. All these ideas we already have are biases that can make us judge incorrectly. And sometimes those assumptions can be really bad. Gladwell brings up the case of Sandra Bland again, that young black woman who got pulled over and ended up dead in jail. He says that what happened with her and the police officer is a classic example of how miscommunication, bias, and the whole power dynamic can make things go so wrong. The officer, Brian Encinia, was suspicious of Bland right away. He saw her frustration and anger as, like, defiance and being aggressive. And that's what made things escalate, leading to her arrest and, well, her death. And it's so sad because it could have been prevented. If the officer had been more understanding, more aware of his own biases, maybe things would have gone differently. It's a reminder that our words have power and our actions matter. We have a responsibility to be careful when we interact with strangers, to be humble and aware of how easily things can be misunderstood. One of the things that really hit me in talking to strangers was Gladwell's discussion of those CIA interrogations and how they use things like waterboarding. It's a really tough subject, and it makes you ask, how far can we go to get information from someone, especially someone they think is a terrorist? Gladwell talks about James Mitchell, who helped create that program. Mitchell says they were trying to stop future attacks, to save people. They felt like these harsh methods were necessary, that they needed to do it to get information for people who wouldn't talk. But then Gladwell brings up another expert, Charles Morgan, who doesn't agree with that. Morgan says that torture, even the mental kind, can mess with people's memories. It can make it hard for them to remember things accurately. So even if they confess, you don't know if they're telling the truth or just saying what they think the interrogators want to hear. It makes you think, right? And it makes you wonder about the effects of that kind of stuff. Not just on the people being interrogated, but on the people doing it too. What does it do to us when we hurt other people, even if we say it's for a good reason? And this goes back to that idea of talking to strangers. If we can't even trust what people say when they're under that much pressure, how can we understand them in normal conversations? I think what Gladwell is saying is that we need to be really careful, really aware, and really humble. We don't always know everything, and we make mistakes. We have to listen more, ask questions, and give people the benefit of the doubt, even when it's hard. It's not about being naive or letting people walk all over us. It's about finding that balance, being skeptical, but also understanding, protecting ourselves, but being open to connecting with other people. It's like that saying, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. We never really know what someone else is going through, what their story is. And I think that's an important thing to remember when we're dealing with strangers. We need to be patient. We need to try to understand. And we need to see each other as well as human beings, even when it's hard, when we don't agree, or when we don't understand each other. And maybe, just maybe, if we do that, we can build connections instead of walls. And make a world where we judge less, listen more, and are open to finding those moments where we connect. So that's it. That's my deep dive into talking to strangers. It's really made me think about things differently, made me more aware of my own biases, and it's given me a whole new appreciation for how complex it is to connect with people. I hope it made you think too. And until next time, stay curious, keep an open mind, and keep talking to strangers. You never know what you might learn.